Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. I am here today to do my weekly Friday Reads video where I wrap up the week in reading, talk about anything I have been reading, anything I've finished, and just other things that have been going on in the bookish world and a little bit outside of the bookish world sometimes. We get a little crazy. Not really. There's a lot to talk about in the Friday Reads world. I finished a book just this morning. I have some other things ongoing, but we'll get to the Friday Reads portion in a little bit. Just a couple of things I wanted to talk about before we get there. First, I wanted to mention that I was really pleasantly surprised that a lot of people were just as excited to talk about what might win the Pulitzer Prize for fiction as I was when I posted my video earlier this week about the ALA notable titles for 2022, which are the books that were published last year, and how that frequently can be an indicator of what might win the Pulitzer Prize. It's very a dodgy business trying to predict what will win the Pulitzer, but I was excited about it. I was glad that so many other people were excited as well. I'll put a link to that video in the description box down below if you'd like to check it out. There will be other videos and links down there as well if you are looking for other rabbit holes to go down or little treasure troves of other content, if you want to call it that. It's probably not really. But the other thing I wanted to talk about first is that in my January reading wrap-up, which was also posted earlier this week, and which will also be in the description box down below, I talked about how I read the book How to Resist Amazon and Why by Danny Kane. I didn't grab my copy of the book to hold up, but I did talk about it. And if you do click on that link, you'll find me talking about it. In it, I mentioned that I learned from that book that ABE Books, which is a used book retailer online, is actually owned by Amazon. It's not branded for Amazon anywhere, and because the used book retailer does the actual shipping, at no point would you know Amazon actually owns them and is taking a big chunk of the profits. So I learned from the book that this company I had been supporting is actually owned by Amazon. They trick you like that. And somebody commented to ask where I plan on getting used books in the future, because now I am not going to be using ABE Books, which is a bit of a shame because that is where I was finding a lot of my Franklin Library Pulitzer Prize editions. And you know exactly what I'm talking about if you have watched recent book hauls where I've talked about them. And I love them. They're pretty. That's where I was watching for them. But there are other sites out there. My immediate plan is to start leaning on Powell's for used book needs. Powell's is obviously an independent bookstore. I like to support independent bookstores, so it's a kind of natural fit. The thing is, that is going to be the one that I use much more specifically when I have like a specific title in mind, and maybe not if I'm looking for Franklin Library editions. I am actually going to be looking on Etsy for some of the Franklin Library editions because there are used booksellers that are using that platform, and they do have Franklin Library editions. I had actually ordered one of my other ones from Etsy last year and it came in good condition. I ordered a used book from Powell's last year and it came in good condition. It was a good experience. So Powell's is going to be my sort of used bookstore of choice moving forward. It's going to be my first line of defense. And if I can't get it from them, I will look at other retailers. I haven't looked too closely into other sites to see which ones might be good. If you have recommendations, please put them in the comment section down below. Let's turn that into a resource for me and for anybody else who is looking for a used book retailer and wants to try to support one that is not owned by Amazon. Because the thing with Amazon, and I don't know if this is true for Etsy, I'll have to look into this, but the thing about Amazon is they make a lot of money off of third-party vendors, people who are selling used books, things like that, because they take a cut of the profit. And the cut of the profit that they take has been growing exponentially over recent years, which means that the person who is actually selling the book, who is actually shipping the book, and who is actually responsible for getting the book to you and in good condition, and who depends on that income, is getting a smaller cut than they should. And that's why I don't want to support a site that is owned by Amazon. I have to look into Etsy to see what percentage they take and whether or not that's fair. It's hard trying to be moral in this world, but that's the way it is. And the really tricky thing is that I don't know what's going on with my local used bookstore. I just recently found out some troubling news about them. It's a couple of years old. I didn't hear about it until just recently. I don't want to mention the store. It's a good used bookstore, but the owner of the store was accused of sexual harassment a few years ago, and a couple of employees actually walked out because of it. And that's not good. So I'm not supporting my local used bookstore right now, which is a shame because I have a pile of books that I had been planning to take there at some point. I need to go through and pull out more, actually. So I haven't decided what to do about that. It's the only real used bookstore in town. And if that's true, I have to look into it a little bit because that was a couple of years ago. I don't know if that person still owns the store. I haven't had a chance to do any research since I found out just recently. So that's kind of in flux as well. But I am probably going to be looking online for a lot of my used book needs in the future. And Powell's is going to be the number one solution for that, for me at least. But again, I would love to hear what you do for used books online. If there are good stores in your area, that's not necessarily going to help me, but you can put all of that in the comment section down below because again, I need advice and clearly some other people are looking for it as well on what to do with that. I will also have links in the description box down below for the LGBTQ in Translation read along, which is underway. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. I have not actually started the book yet, but we're going to get to that in the Friday Reads portion. Let's move into that, by the way, the actual Friday Reads portion of this video. But we're going to start with the book that I finished this week. It's Nobody's Magic by Destiny O. Birdsong. This is something that was one of my most anticipated reads of 2022. I'll put a link to that video in the description box down below if you would like to check out. And it paid off in this case. I had a little bit of a disappointment with the other book that I had finished last week, which was also one of my most anticipated reads. That was The Boy with the Bird in His Chest. But this one paid off. And I kind of knew it would because of the description of the book, because the cover looked really good. But also there was a blurb by Disha Filia, who is the author of my beloved The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, on the cover of the book. I'm using this in the Montana Book Company's Reading Challenge for 2022. It is going to be my book that was recommended by an author I like because of that blurb from Disha Filia. So if you're keeping track, on the Montana Book Company Reading Challenge, I have now completed 4 prompts, and I'll also have a link to the challenge on Storygraph down below if you'd like to follow along with that. Lots of stuff down below, like I said. Anyway, let's talk about Nobody's Magic because it is a really good book. I believe Destiny O. Birdsong had already published a volume of poetry, but this was her first novel. So it's not technically a debut, but it is a debut novel, so it falls into that area. And it is basically 3 short novels. They're not short stories. They're almost 3 sort of novellas, 3 sections within the book that are each about a Black woman with albinism who either lives in or is from the Louisiana area, and they are very interesting stories. The characters are really vibrant and colorful. I should say that I found this book on a couple of anticipated books list of the year, but Matthew Sharapa also had talked about it in his most anticipated books of 2022. So credit where it's due. That is actually where I had it caught my attention. But anyway, it's really interesting stories. The characters are very vibrant. I think the plotting is, for the most part, really good. There are a couple of areas where it's not. I do think the first section is probably the weakest. It's probably the one that I would have put in the middle, although it is really interesting. And it really introduces you to the characters very quickly. You are pretty immediately immersed into the world of the book, and that is always a good thing. It just is a little bit repetitive, more so than the other stories, because the character in it has an overprotective father who is very domineering, not just of her, but of her mother and any friends and employees, just people in their life. You can't be in the sort of inner circle of their family without being controlled by the father. And she has been comfortable being spoiled by him and living under his thumb for a while because of an incident that happened when she was younger in school. And I don't want to go into that too much. But it just kind of repeats over and over again that she is not given information that she needs to make decisions about her life. And that kind of repeats a little too much, to the point where you're kind of like, okay, I get it. No, I really get it. I don't think it's as much of a problem. But when it is the first section, it almost sets you up. And I do think it's the section that lacks the most resolution the most. It sort of sets up some big storylines and ideas and then doesn't follow through on them. And if you don't like short stories, you might not like this book because they function like short stories. They're just a little bit longer. And short stories don't always have tidy resolutions. And that is true of these stories as well. But it's the first one in particular. The first one is the only one I think where it's a bit of a problem. That is the one where when it ended and went to the next one, I kind of thought to myself, I really hope it loops back. And it didn't. I think it's fine ultimately because the other two sections were really solid. But I would say that is probably the one that was the weakest. Although it really did introduce the world that Destiny O Birdsong has created really well. All three of the characters in all three of the sections are at some crucial point in their life. I think the way it is described in the blurb on the book is that they are at a crossroads, and that is very true. Again, in the first story, she is trying to become an independent woman and take control of her own life. In another one, a woman's mother has just died. And in the third, I don't want to spoil the third, so I'll let you take this journey if you want. So if you are a fan of my beloved The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, you will probably love this book as much as I did. I really enjoyed it a lot. But I have a couple of little warnings. Again, if you don't like short stories, and your problem with short stories is that they tend not to have tidy resolutions, you might not like Nobody's Magic. If you didn't like Luster by Raven Leilani or Real Life by Brandon Taylor, because I know those books were a little bit divisive, you might also not like Nobody's Magic, because the characters in it are going through some stuff, like heavy stuff. They're going through grief. They're going through loneliness. They don't always make really good decisions. They do a lot of things that can be very self-destructive. So if that is something that really bothered you about Luster or Real Life, you might not like this book as well. I liked Real Life, and my problems with Luster by Raven Leilani were more with the plotting than they were with the characters. I thought it really did a good job putting you in the head of the character, who is this young black woman who is going through depression and makes a lot of bad choices. But if that was something that infuriated you, you might not like this book as well. So I recommend it, but just know that those things might steer you off of it if there weren't things that you responded to in those other books. But I would definitely recommend it. Try seeking it out if you can. I had a copy of this on NetGalley. It is actually published, I believe, on the 15th. Let me double check. Yes. February 8th is when Nobody's Magic is going to be published. So see if your library has it. Maybe you can get it through an independent bookseller. I was lucky enough to get approved for an early copy on NetGalley, but I would definitely recommend it, barring any of those special circumstances that I mentioned here. And if you do read it, I would love to hear your perspective on it, because this is a book that I feel like I would like to talk to people about. It has a lot of really interesting things that go in it, and it talks a lot about the ways in which these women are treated differently and treated badly because of their condition. It's not necessarily a disability, but people treat it like a disability. And in one instance, in one of the stories, somebody finds out that she has albinism. They had previously just thought that she was very, very, very light-skinned. And it talks about the ways in which people handle that very ignorantly. And he basically just decides that she's magic. And it's wild that somebody could be treated like this. But it's really interesting, and it does a really good job putting you in the heads of these three women and their experience of the world, and how that experience of the world has shaped them and made them a little bit distrustful of people and the world and the men around them and things like that, and how their relationships function. I found it very fascinating. And as somebody who reads to learn about different experiences in the world and different places in the world, I've never been to Louisiana. I just found it to be a really interesting book. So I would recommend it, again, barring any of those circumstances that I mentioned, like if you don't like short stories or if you weren't a fan of like Luster or Real Life. So that one, for sure, I would say check out. In the meantime, on February 1st, I started my buddy read of Beloved by Toni Morrison, which I am doing with Amelia Reeds, who is a commenter. She was the person I did a buddy read of the Song of Solomon on back in 2020. And we have been wanting to get to this book ever since. So we're finally getting around to it. We are going one chapter per day, barring any circumstances where one of us, for whatever reason, can't get to the chapter. So we are 3 chapters in at this point, and I am loving it so far. Toni Morrison does a really good job immersing you into the world of her characters. In the foreword, she even mentions that in particular, she really wanted this book to make you feel like you had been thrust into something that was already going on. And she does that, but in a way that still introduces you to the characters, and yet you feel like by the end of that first chapter, which is only about 20 pages, you feel like you know them and what they are about and what kind of person they are. Toni Morrison is incredibly skilled in that area. And she does a lot of really good introduction to the world in which these people live and how it works. Because like Song of Solomon, this world is grounded in the real world, but has sort of magical realism elements. It is also a ghost story. And I talked to Amelia about this. I had some preconceived notions about Beloved that are turning out not to be true. I thought the ghost element came later, and I thought the reality of Beloved and who she was something like a twist later on. However, in the first chapter, Sethe is living in a house that is haunted by her baby daughter, Beloved. And it doesn't give you all the details of what happens, but it really sets out from there, letting you know everything about the term. So I've had to sort of adjust my expectations because, like I said, I had some preconceived notions about this book that are turning out not to be true, but I'm very willing to go along on the ride, and what I'm discovering is perhaps even better than what I had anticipated. Your trigger warnings for this one are that if you don't like magical realism, you might not like this, although it's not magical realism in the sense of like Gabriel Garcia Marquez or Laura Esquivel or any of that. But there are definitely elements of it in this story, as there were in Song of Solomon. And there is sexual assault. And if ghost stories are not your thing, I think she does a really great job setting this one up. I mean, I'm not super into ghost stories or paranormal anything, but I'm really enjoying this so far, and I can't wait to get further along in it. There are so many beautiful lines too, and some of them are kind of unexpected. Like when she's talking about Sethe's sons leaving, she mentions that one of them leaves. Basically, they both leave because of the haunting, but she mentions specifically that one of them's, the straw that broke the camel's back on that one was that tiny handprints appeared on a birthday cake. It's just tiny little details that are so beautiful and gorgeous. And of course, this is painful to read because the people in this book have not had happy lives, but I'm really looking forward to getting further in this book. Toni Morrison is just a master. Plain and simple, full stop. Only about 15% of the way into it. By the way, I need to talk about Storygraph for a moment because Amelia set up a buddy read for both of us on the Storygraph because they just debuted a buddy read feature on the Storygraph. And it's really cool. If you're not familiar with buddy reads and how they work, a lot of the time you either have to use Discord or WhatsApp or Voxer, and you send messages back and forth to each other. And of course, that is probably going to be my preferred method continuing into the future. But Storygraph has this really cool way of doing it where you can invite somebody to do a buddy read with you. You can check in with your progress on the book, which I don't typically do, but you can also leave comments. So what you can do is if you finish chapter 2 and leave a comment, you can say what page number it's good for. And if the person you are buddy reading with has not gotten to that point, that comment is locked to avoid spoilers. It's just a really cool feature. And actually, I've been playing around with the Storygraph a lot more over the past week. And I think it's way more fun than Goodreads. I initially started opening my Storygraph account because I wanted an alternative to Goodreads. And it was more reactionary than because of what Storygraph was. But I am really starting to love what Storygraph is. And I think it's better than Goodreads. It's still new. It's still early. It's still developing. However, it's a really cool site. So I'm just going to put that out there as well. And we will continue with Toni Morrison's Beloved. I just love this photo of her that's on these books as well. She could be a contender for my favorite author. I haven't read E.M. Forster in a while, and he's the person I always say is my favorite author. So I might have to reevaluate as I get further into the works of Toni Morrison, and I might need to revisit some E.M. Forster. I think he's still my favorite, but she is definitely up there. She is a tremendous writer. So that's what I finished. That's what I'm working on the side. I had broken my rule about reading 2 physical books at once, even though Nobody's Magic is not a physical book. It's an e-galley. And that actually went well. I'm going to break it again this weekend. First, I should mention that I, once again, did not make any progress in the audiobook I am listening to, which is the Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois by Honorée, Fannone, Jeffers, and I need to fix that this week. I'm telling myself is going to be the week where I finally get back to it. Basically, once I got sick with COVID, I fell off the audio wagon and wasn't doing a great job paying attention, and I just haven't really gotten back to it. And I think part of that is that I've been churning out books in physical format that I haven't had any reason to dive back into audiobooks. So I need to do that because I definitely want to make progress on the Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois. I was enjoying it, so I need to get back to it. I might even start over at this point because it's been 3 weeks at this point, and I wasn't that far into it anyway. So that is going to be my project for this week. My project for the weekend is that I'm breaking my rule again and picking up another physical book, and that is The Membranes by Ta-Wei. I've talked about this, but just to recap, the LGBTQ in translation read-along for February and March is now underway. There are some people who haven't read yet. I have not checked in with the chat yet because I plan on getting started this weekend, but it is underway and ongoing. I'll put the details of it in the description box down below. If you would like to check it out and perhaps participate, I should mention that this was translated by Larissa, Heinrich. So this is a LGBTQ sci-fi speculative fiction Chinese book that was published in 1995. I'm looking forward to trying it. It's only small, so I'm hoping that by the weekend I can be done, and then I will really just have to focus on Beloved and the Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois. But this is my plan for the weekend. Get myself into the LGBTQ in translation read along, and then once this is done and Beloved is done, I am going to think about whether or not I'm going to do the other book, the sort of unofficial LGBTQ in translation book for February and March. I'm probably going to wait until March for this one, To the Friend Who Did Not Save My Life by Hervé Guibert, translated by Linda Coverdale. That is probably going to wait until March, and these are my current projects that I am working on. I would love to hear what you've been up to, what you have been reading, what you've been loving, what you've been hating, anything like that in the comment section down below. Just your coffee update. Somebody had asked, I think it was Brian at Bookish, had asked why I went off of coffee. And it was just when I got sick. I always prefer tea when I'm not feeling well. So I jumped to tea when I got sick because, you know, the congestion, the gross, icky stuff that goes along with it. Tea was much better. And then I was taking some medication that dehydrated me a little bit, so I felt like I had to keep just pumping tea into my system, and coffee which can dehydrate you a little bit, so I didn't want to do it. But I have been working coffee back into my life this week, and it has been wonderful. So that was my big news for this week. I still have a cough, still not 100%, but doing much, much, much better. So I'm hoping that means I'm on the way to recovery. But anyway, I'd love to hear how your went and all of that. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.